sticks, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Trey Orndorff, a political scientist at Oklahoma Christian University, and I'm joined by Ken Katkin, a professor of law at Chase Law School in Northern Kentucky. Welcome back to the show, Ken.
Hey, thanks, Trey. It's great to be back.
Yeah, it's an exciting week, and before we started the show, we wanted to kind of mention that on Friday there was a huge news item that we're not going to talk about, but I thought I'd at least mention it, and that's that the Attorney General Barr received a report by Special Counsel Mueller about 5 o'clock on Friday that summed up the findings from Mueller's investigation into the Russian attack on the 2016 presidential election. Barr's notified congressional leaders, and he is, quote, reviewing the report, and he anticipates that you're going to have portions of it shortly, end quote. But of course, Ken and I, we can't really talk about something that hasn't come out to the public yet. No. But I did want to let you know that that is on the Politics Guys radar, but that will be coming once we have some additional information. And of course, that assumes that the White House is going to let that out. They're not going to have any kind of potential block on it. So we'll see what happens with that. But for now, we'll leave that in the hands of the State Department to determine. And instead, what we're going to turn to this week is, I think, a story that has really flown under the radar. And I'm happy to get to do this one with you, Ken. And that is, there is the court cases moving forward, the District of Columbia versus Donald J. Trump. And the question of this case is whether President Trump is violating the Constitution by accepting payments from state officials and foreign diplomats at his Washington, D.C. hotel. Now, what's really interesting about this, for those of you who haven't read the Constitution lately, is that it all comes down to this really antiquated word. You've probably never heard of it in the Constitution, and the meaning of which has not really been ruled on by the courts. So it's not often that we have new constitutional issues. And the issue and the word is emolument. Am I saying that right, Ken?
They usually say emolument.
Emolument. Okay, well, see, I'm learning something. I've only ever read it. I mean, again, this doesn't come up in con law, people, right? Like, this is not
that often. Yep.
And it's only mentioned 3 places. It's found 3 places in the Constitution, 2 of which aren't really pertinent for us: Article 1, Section 9, and Article 1, Section 6. In which case, it's talking about Congress and the ability of Congress not to have this in connection with foreign entities. But the court case at hand is actually looking at the 3rd instance of it, and that's in Article 2, Section 1, where it says that, quote, the president shall, at stated times, receive for his services a compensation which shall neither be increased nor diminished during the period for which he shall have been elected, and he shall not receive within that period any, I'll say that word one more time for me, Ken.
Emolument.
Emolument from the United States or any of them. And the idea
Well, I got to stop you though, Trey, because actually I think the Article 1, Section 9 emoluments clause is actually even more relevant to the case than the other clause that you mentioned.
Well, let's talk about it then, Ken.
Okay. So the Article 1, Section 9 clause says no person holding any office of profit or trust under the United States. So it applies to all federal officers, including the president, but not just the president.
Without the consent of Congress.
No person holding any office or profit of trust shall, without the consent of Congress, accept any present emolument, office, or title of any kind whatever from any king, prince, or foreign state. That clause is very much at issue in this lawsuit.
And let me just say, I mean, I even had to turn to trusty old black law on my shelf. And it defines it as, quote, an advantage, profit, or gain received as the result of one's employment or one's holding office. And as I understand it, and as I've read the briefs for this, the question between the Trump administration and the District of Columbia is how narrow or broad that word means. In other words, because Trump hasn't divested himself of his companies, is he getting whatever this is going to be defined as or not? So can you tell us a little bit more, Ken? I mean, am I missing? Has there been a case on this term, or am I right in saying that I had not found one?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any Supreme Court case where this term has been litigated. There are some older opinions by the White House Office of Legal Counsel, which is the branch of the Justice Department that often is asked to write kind of research memoranda on the meaning of obscure constitutional clauses that haven't been litigated yet. So there are some OLC memos that go into the meaning of it, but not any Supreme Court cases that I'm aware of.
So if you were litigating this issue, where do you think the court? I mean, obviously, in this case, I mean, it's moved forward. So the fact that they've accepted it means that they think there's something here to be adjudicated. What's your take on that, Ken? And whose side would you rather be on if you could pick one?
Oh yeah, I'm certainly on the plaintiff's side. I believe there's been a violation of the emoluments clause here. So the theory of the case would be that when foreign dignitaries and delegations stay in the Trump hotel and pay higher prices than they would pay, just for the needing a place to stay, for the purpose of currying favor with Trump.
Would it even have to be higher prices? I mean, if they're just receiving anything, isn't there an argument to be made there that you violated it in and of itself?
Yeah, there absolutely is. But I think it's made easier by the price being higher, right? So you could argue, right? So what you said would be an argument that let's say a hotel room is worth $200 and Trump charges $200 and the Saudi ambassador stays there for $200, so it's a fair price. Even then, since Trump is making some money off that $200, you could say that that's an emolument because whatever profit he's made, it's coming from a foreign state. But I think what the plaintiffs are actually arguing, which is I think makes the argument a little easier on the facts, is that the Trump hotels charge very high rates relative to their competitors, and that these foreign dignitaries do like to stay there anyhow. And there's some evidence in depositions and such that they say, yeah, we want to stay there so we can tell Trump that we stayed there. Right. So that is, I think, real evidence that at least part of the price being paid is a foreign dignitary giving money to Trump in a way that's visible to Trump to curry favor with Trump. And so I would think that goes within the core meaning of emoluments.
So now, that kind of seemed to be that way. Now, the Trump brief suggests, however, that it has to be designed. In other words, there has to be intent. So it can't just be compensation, but there has to be effectively, they're getting it for that expressed purpose. So that because this is incident, in other words, I have a business that's going to happen anyway, they would actually have to be kind of paying me off. What do you think about that argument? That's the kind of the crux of the brief from the Trump side.
Yeah, I mean, I'm open to that argument. I'm not sure that's wrong, but I think on these facts, the actual facts in this case establish that is what's going on, right? So in other words, if Trump owns something like a casino, and some foreign dignitary went and played blackjack in the casino, and Trump literally never knew about that, then what Trump is arguing is, well, then there's no emolument because he how could it be currying favor if he never even knew? Yeah, I think that's a fair argument. I agree with that argument. But I think what the facts in these cases are showing is that the foreign dignitaries are very much making a point of telling Trump that they stayed in his hotel, and everybody knows that the rate that they're being charged is very much above the going rate, and that the reason that they're paying it is just to hand money to him because they're currying favor, and they make sure that he does know that. So that's why I think on those facts, this is an easy case. I don't really disagree with Trump's interpretation of what the clause might mean, but I do disagree with his interpretation of the facts that have been established here.
Now, this is what I had kind of wondered, and that is that generally speaking, one of the reasons this has not come up is that presidents have put their finances to kind of put it, say, this isn't technically correct, but in a blind trust in a way, meaning that they are not directing it, so that what you're saying would have to be the case, right? So maybe I'm making a killing on, the casino, but I don't know that I own that particular casino or pieces of that casino or stock in that casino, and ergo, it can't influence or not influence me one way or the other.
Yeah.
What's unique about this is Trump not being willing to divest himself. Are there, and I've looked at this a little bit, but are there other examples where presidents were not willing to take this step, where this happened, but has not been adjudicated? At least in the contemporary era, I can't find any examples of that.
No. I mean, I don't know how long there's been a White House ethics office. I don't know when that started. It doesn't go all the way back to the founding era, but in all the years that we've had a White House ethics office, we've never had a president refuse to follow the advice of the White House ethics office on what they need to do to divest. So I think, you've had a lot of rich presidents, but typically their wealth is in things like stock holdings. And so they would, give the stock holdings to a financial manager in a blind trust and say, go ahead and trade my stocks, but don't ever tell me what's in there, so that no decision I make could be influenced by what's in there. So we've certainly never had a president, say in the 20th or 21st centuries, in the period that there's been a White House ethics office, who has been given advice about how to avoid undue influence and corruption, and not taken that advice. It's novel and unprecedented, and that's why I think it leads to an unprecedented violation of the Emoluments Clause.
So kind of my final question on this as we move forward, and one that I'm interested in, is there's, of course, some politics to be had here if you're the Supreme Court. And I don't mean that in the sense of just conservative and liberal justices attempting to make ideological decisions, but the case of, would the court want to rule against the president if they don't think the president's going to actually abide by that ruling? I mean, that has come into play a number of times in the Supreme Court's history. So how do you think the Supreme Court handles this, given that it's probably a delicate question for court power as well as for the interpretation of this clause?
Well, yeah, I mean, it depends what happens in the lower courts. So one result that I could see, which I'm not sure the Supreme Court would necessarily disturb, would be if the lower court, it's going to wind up being the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals that'll get these cases. If the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals ultimately orders the Trump Organization, which is a corporation, to disgorge some money to these plaintiffs, right, and says, yeah, you've because of your violation of the Emoluments Clause, you've made some excess profits in violation of the Emoluments Clause, and your competing hotels and such have lost out in unfair competition because people who stayed in the competing hotels couldn't partly bribe the president by staying there. So the Trump Organization has to pay a money judgment to some competing hotels. I think that it wouldn't be the Supreme Court might not take that case at all. They probably would take it because it's a novel interpretation of the Emoluments Clause. But I don't think there'd be a chance of presidential resistance if the Supreme Court affirmed that. I'm not saying they will affirm it. Maybe they'd reverse it. But if they actually affirmed an order like that, and it was a judicial order against the Trump Organization to disgorge money, then I think that order would be enforceable. I really don't see how the president would be able to obstruct enforcement of it.
Yeah, that was just a kind of a question that had kind of floated around in my head. But I'll be interested to see how this case moves forward. So the second issue that we want to take on, and this one hits maybe a little bit closer to home to both of us. Of course, neither of us are at research institutions. Is this week on Thursday, President Trump signed an executive order designed to protect free speech on college campuses. It drew wide applause from conservative groups and more muted applause from college administrators and bafflement, I think, from many faculty. President Trump himself at the signing said, quote, "Under the guise of speech and safe spaces and trigger warnings, universities have tried to restrict free thought, impose total conformity, and shut down the voices of great young Americans," end quote. He also noted that the executive order was just the beginning, and I think that's one of the things that makes this investigation today interesting to talk about. This is the beginning, he says, of our efforts to protect free speech. Now, if you actually read the executive order, you're going to see it's actually not just about free speech. It's also about the way you can have openness in finances. But on the side of free speech, it says that the purpose is to, quote, promote free and open debate on college and university campuses, end quote. And it's tied to the idea that doing so is going to, if you don't do this, that there's going to be an impediment to beneficial research, and it's going to undermine opening. Now, that's the policy, this idea to engage institutions to foster environments that promote, quote, open, intellectually engaging, and diverse debate, end quote. But how does this actually going to happen? Well, it's the executive order says that federal agencies are going to have to take appropriate steps, and that is left undefined, to ensure institutions that receive federal research or education grants promote free inquiry. So what does this mean pragmatically? It's very unclear. A lot of it is probably a symbolic move to make the right a little bit happier about what they see as being a hostile leftist environment on campuses. I don't see this having a big impact in the policy realm, but it is worthy, I think, to kind of talk about, one, because this seems to be the beginning of more, as Trump states during the signing ceremony, and two, because does this win him some points in the political realm? So, Ken, what do you think about the executive order? I mean, do you feel like speech is going to be more free come next semester?
Well, I always hope that speech on campuses will be more free, but I'm not sure I believe that there's as many threats as Fox News might say. When I first read the Washington Post article and suggested to you that we talk about this, I hadn't yet seen the executive order. And as I'm reading the executive order, just in preparation for this show, it's pretty weak. I think it's pretty weak medicine. There's really nothing in there. There's some language of purpose that it's the policy of the federal government to encourage institutions to foster environments that promote open, intellectually engaging, and diverse debate, including through compliance with the First Amendment. Well, I mean, for the most part, most universities right now today would say that they exist to promote open, intellectually engaging, and diverse debate, and that they do comply with the First Amendment. So pushing them in that direction, I don't think there's going to be any pushback on that. Perhaps maybe some different conceptions here about what it means to promote open, intellectually engaging, and diverse debate. And if I could kind of read between the lines a little bit, my sense is that maybe the real controversy involves people who are not members of university communities who want to have access to campuses. So the Milo Yiannopoulos of the world and people like that who want to go onto campuses that they're not part of the university community of. And I think some universities, may not feel that they have to open their doors to just anybody who wants to come there. Although I think pretty much every university would feel that their own faculty members, their own students, should have a complete freedom of speech rights in substantially all respects that the order is concerned with. So that's kind of what I read. The question of touring right-wing speakers, I suppose, who aren't part of university communities. I think that may be who this order is really directed to protect.
Well, and it's interesting. What I find a little bit unique about it is, and just to kind of give a little bit of my bias, I was involved. Are you familiar with the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education?
I'm a paid-up member.
Okay, fire, yeah. I think that there actually was a time when that there were some First Amendment issues on college campuses. But I think through the works of institutions like FIRE, many of those have already been undermined. So I see this really more as a position take by the White House than it really is, as you're noting. There's really no teeth to this. I think the hard work has been done by other institutions leading up to, leading in decades past to this point. So
actually, to agree with you even more on this, I think FIRE, they've litigated some cases, but actually I think the most significant impact that they've had is not in cases that they had to litigate against universities, but in really kind of raising awareness with university administrators nationwide about
working on policy.
what kind of policies most benefit free speech. And I think, most universities have been very open to that kind of input. It's not like Fiers had to fight them. It's really like Fiers just had to explain some things to them.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I'll say, I mean, it was in the, in the 90s, he mentions, for instance, these safe spaces. But in some ways, that's a reaction to getting rid of free speech zones, which were areas on campus, in some ways, were used as a way to try to make speech more orderly, but oftentimes was pragmatically a problem because it then relegated what people could say to zones that didn't matter and in ways that couldn't matter, and it restricted the way that students generally could talk. But that's really primarily a thing of the past. It's just once again, Ken, it is fascinating how from different points of view here we are. Both Fiers support.
Also, you got to also wonder if Trump's coordinating his messaging on free speech with Devin Nunes this week either.
Yeah,
Nunes suing a bunch of critics the same week that Trump is extolling free speech.
Well, there's free speech, and then there's free speech against. But yeah, it's interesting for me at least. I guess it bothers me a little bit in the sense that I feel like he's co-opting an issue that I think is important, but his already had a lot of push on, and I don't know. So that for me at least, I find that a little bit problematic. But I mean, I guess I'll take a win where I can. Right?
Yeah, exactly. I think the idea that universities should be encouraged to promote open, intellectually engaging, and diverse debate, and should comply with the First Amendment, I think is something everyone in America should agree with. And if that's what this executive order says, well, that's wonderful.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's the appendix to the First Amendment there, in case you weren't sure. Yeah. Now, as we move forward in the show, the next issue that we want to take on is jobs in the economy. And one of the reasons I want to talk about this, listeners, is because it's another under the radar item. One of the things that we just discovered is the job market touched its best. We have our lowest unemployment in 49 years. And so the U.S. economy has actually added jobs for 100 consecutive months. Unemployment sat last month at March at 3.7%. Earnings are increasing significantly, especially when we take a look at Latino and Asian populations. African Americans, their earnings are up, but just not as dramatically as in other categories. The Federal Reserve is not raising rates, because Mr. Powell says tells Congress it's time to be patient. On the other side of this economic boom there's the question of the federal deficit. In February, we hit $234 billion with a B. That's a record deficit, is a result of government paying back more in corporate taxes than it took in, with the corporate tax rate down 14.3 billion. So as taxes are going down, spending is heading up. As a matter of fact, it was 145.6 billion in comparison to the same period last year, and the debt surpassed the 22 trillion mark for the first time in the country's history. And and for you, Ken, I think there's a couple of questions here. One is we oftentimes have this separation between what people are experiencing currently and the deficit. Republicans and Democrats, and this drives me nuts, everybody hates the deficit when they're not the ones creating the budget. But as soon as they have control of the budget, then, well, deficit spending is absolutely fine. What do you think about these numbers, and what do you think about the cost?
Yeah, well, first, I'll push back slightly. I don't think Democrats are as bad about deficits as Republicans are. And, even when Democrats enact ambitious spending programs like the Affordable Care Act, spent $1 trillion and didn't increase the deficit by a penny because it was fully paid for through new taxes that it imposed. So, I think it's really the Republicans that are willing to do the tax cuts without corresponding spending cuts, but that when Democrats want to do spending increases, Clinton, Obama, they did tax increases. So they found ways to pay for those things. It wasn't purely out of deficit spending. Clinton, in fact, gave us the only budget surpluses. And I know Gingrich played a role in that, but Clinton and Gingrich gave us the only budget surpluses that this country's had since the 1950s.
That's true.
So yeah. So Obama decreased his deficit every single year that he was in relative to the year before. He started with huge deficits because of the 2008 bailouts and everything. But Obama's trajectory was always good on that point. So I think that it's not equal blame to go around. But I think it's very hard to know what deficits like this are going to mean. They're very, very hard to get out of, because when the debt grows like this, then so much of the current budget has to go to paying interest on the huge debt that just makes it harder and harder to get out of a deficit situation. So I guess we'll learn, soon what that means. The jobs numbers, it's true that they've continued to improve. They improved, I think, every single quarter of the Obama presidency, and have continued to improve some in the Trump presidency. But I actually don't think that this particular quarter is especially significant, because this quarter you actually had, a significant number of the jobs are just the federal government had been shut down. All those workers had been furloughed. And when the government reopened, that alone, accounted for, some of the 0.2% increase in jobs that we saw this quarter over last quarter. So I see this a little bit more as a status quo than a great leap forward, but certainly it's a status quo at a good level.
I mean, while that is true, that can't account for all of that shift.
Well, you were saying we were at 3.7% unemployment, which is great, but one quarter ago it was 3.9%. So it's a little bit of an improvement, but I'm just saying this quarter isn't. There's been improvements every quarter for a long time now, so that's.
Oh no, it's definitely a trend. Yes, I see what you're saying, Ken. Yeah.
So to say, well, we're at the best ever, that could literally be said every quarter, for 8 or 9 for about 8 years now. Every quarter we could have said jobs are the best ever. So it's true, but it doesn't seem to me to be.
No, because this is going to be the first time it's at this level since for 49 years. So this is the lowest it has been. So while I guess what you're saying is true, they have been trending down. We have now trended down so long that we have hit a 49-year low.
Yeah, but I think that was true last quarter and the quarter before as well.
3.8 was not. 3.8 and change was the last lowest.
Yeah, but I'm saying when we were at 3.9 or at 4.1, to find times it was that low, you would have also had to go back many, many years.
That is true. It's just not as far back.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I guess I'm just saying I don't see. We're probably agreeing more than we're disagreeing, but I think my slight shade of disagreement here is I don't think Americans could say, well, the economy is much better today than it was 6 months ago or 1 year ago. I think it's a little bit better, and it's been a little bit better, every quarter for quite a while now. So that adds up. But you only experience it as getting a little bit better.
Well, yeah, exactly. I think what's interesting about the conversation today, though, is it going to continue to trend down? So is this a bottom? Is it going to continue to trend down? And the reason I bring that up, Ken, is kind of put it into some broader context here, is for listeners you might not know, is that there's really two competing models for predicting presidential elections. One focus very heavily on poll numbers, favorability ratings. In other words, how many people favor a president versus have strong negative feelings for the president. The other major model focuses on structural features, and it suggests that things like the GDP, prices, inflation, etc., those kind of structural economic concerns, are the ones that actually determine whether incumbents will win or they'll lose. And those models, of course, downplay what I think many of our listeners focus on, which is those day-to-day political events, those campaign events, that's so-called favorability. And what is coming out right now is that most of those structural models, as we start looking forward and predicting 2020, are suggesting that Trump, if these kinds of trends were to continue, would actually kind of have a blowout victory. As a matter of fact, one famous model has Trump winning with 294 electoral college votes. Even if the economy remained stagnant or got a little bit worse, he would still end up winning on those particular models. So one of the reasons for being interested in these kinds of these economic positions is how well or poorly will the president potentially do in a matchup. So what do you think about those competing models? And do you think that even if this is just quarter on quarter, a trend that's been going on for years, is this ultimately a win for Trump?
Well, it's obviously better for Trump to have the economy that he's got than to have an economy that was doing worse. But I don't think it'll be as dispositive as all that. I mean, those models, they would have predicted that Gore would have won in 2000. They would have predicted that Hillary Clinton, who wanted to carry on Obama's policies, would have won in 2016. Those were good economic times. Now, admittedly, those were term limited presidents, and so it was they themselves weren't able to run for re-election. But I also think that the economy.
Well, just to be clear, the structural model actually had Trump winning.
When in 16?
Mm-hmm.
How could that be based on the economy of 16?
Because for prices and inflation, those issues were bad enough, and you have what's called nobody is the incumbent, so there's no incumbent advantage on the economy in an open election. Well,
there wasn't any inflation in 16. I don't remember exactly what the unemployment was, but it wasn't terrible. This was a pretty good economy in 16.
It wasn't horrible, but interestingly, that particular model, and I actually have the name of it here, it was wrong on the popular vote count, but was very close on the electoral count. So it was off on the it saw Trump is actually winning by a little bit in the popular vote, which obviously did not happen.
Yeah, that surprises me that economic models would have predicted that. But I think also, on the economy, the economy is good in some ways, but in some ways it's not so good because I don't think the voters are going to vote on the deficit. So I don't think that's going to be a huge electoral liability. But I think voters are concerned about inequality, and I think a lot of working people see the economy improving in ways where the economy as a whole is improving much faster than their wages are going up, where corporate profits are going up much faster than wages are going up. Productivity is going up much faster than wages are going up. And interestingly, part of this story, of course, of jobs going, the unemployment rate going down, is that more and more places are putting in the $15 an hour minimum wage. And, some people might have thought that would slow down, that would cause some unemployment, but very much the opposite's been true. So I think that, to the extent that Democrats are going to be running on the $15 minimum wage and on higher taxes on the rich, these are good issues in today's economy, as strong as today's economy is, because growing inequality and I think stagnating wage growth for many people is part of today's economy as well.
Now, that's one of the things that I was interested in myself. But when you take a look at median weekly earnings since 2007 and 2008, they've actually increased across the board, most so as you move forward from 2014 to 2018 for those with less than a high school diploma. And now part of that really could be what you're suggesting, which is that in locales, they have increased those minimum wages, and maybe that's driving up those numbers. But if those percentages remain, so for example, in 18, we're just shy of seeing less than a high school diploma having a median weekly change of about 29% positive in income. Will the as you suggest, the taking a look and saying, well, we have this extreme inequality. Will they still be feeling? I mean, it can exist, but how much will it be felt? Because I think people vote on the feel of what's happening there rather than the actual what's happening there.
Yeah, well, that may be right, and then that makes the actual statistics less relevant. But if that's true, but
I guess what I'm saying is the statistic that might matter more is not the disparity in income, but rather what the poorest individuals experience changes. So if your poorest experienced individuals are experiencing a large change, even if they're still far worse off than the average better to do individual, so upper class person, they're probably not as likely to care about that if they feel like their income is increasing, which it has recently. So what I'm suggesting is that will the wage disparity between the richest workers and the poorest workers matter if the poorest workers are experiencing significant increases in their weekly earnings?
Yeah, so right. So I would say I don't think that they are experiencing what feels like significant increases. So so I think I'm looking now that the median weekly earnings of full-time workers went up by 5%. According to BLS, I'm looking at the BLS statistics as we're talking, and that's 5% higher than a year earlier. That's not trivial, but I still think a lot of people are not feeling like they took home a huge raise, and I think a lot of people are feeling like they have a lot of job insecurity. They're being asked to work harder than ever. Productivity's going way up, and they're working for companies that are profitable, and they're not seeing their wages go up that much. So I think that's a political sentiment that I believe a lot of Americans have, but I guess we'll find out in the election.
No, I mean, I think you're right, but that's where I think it's going to be the question. So you think that they're still feeling that more on that individual level, and therefore you think that will be a salient issue in the upcoming election?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the $15 minimum wage is going to be a major policy initiative of Democrats running for Congress and for the White House. And I do think that this year's experience where you do see some wage increases, as we both talked about 5% over a year ago, I do think a lot of that has to do simply with minimum wage increases in a lot of cities and states. Where the cities and states that went from like $9 or $10 to $15, that's a 50% or at least a 33% wage increase in those places for minimum wage workers, and that'll carry up to people who are just over the minimum wage as well, because their wages are going to have to go up. If people who are making lower wages than them come up to their wages. So I think a lot of that isn't necessarily because business owners are opening up their wallets. I think it's because there's been a legislative wave that's put more money in people's pockets and that hasn't actually hurt the companies that they're working for. So I think that's the way the Democrats, I would hope, will frame the economic questions coming into this election.
But can't you make a free market argument here to suggest that is higher because unemployment is lower? And so as you have a constriction in your market for labor, you're seeing a corresponding increase in the amount that corporations are willing to pay for that labor.
Yeah, I mean, that's the counter argument, but I just don't agree with it. Like, I think that, let's say you've got a worker who can produce $20 an hour of value and he's getting paid $8. I don't think he's getting a raise. And if the law says he's got to be given a raise and paid $15, well, then he'll get the raise because he's producing $20 worth of value. But if they can get that $20 worth of value for $8, I think that's what they're getting. And that's exactly why I think these minimum wage increases have not produced unemployment. If what I was saying wasn't a correct view of the world, then these minimum wage increases would in fact have produced some unemployment. And I don't think there's any evidence they have.
I don't think they're widespread enough to affect the national levels. I mean, as you take a look at the unemployment rate from 10 till now, it has on average been dropping significantly each quarter as you move forward, which correlates kind of nicely with what you see as the increase in earnings. So I'm not going to disagree with you that that there might be people who are making less than the amount of productivity that they're producing for a company. But I don't think that you're going to. I don't think you explain those two phenomenon by suggesting that that comes from having increased the wages in Seattle and a few other places around the country. I think that's going to show up as kind of just being random error in your data at this point, unless, of course, you had a national law that put that at $15 an hour.
Well, it's substantially the whole West Coast, and that's about a third of the country, I think, because it's California too. Yeah, it's $11.
11. Okay.
Yeah.
I knew they had raised it, but I if it had been 15, I would have been. I thought, wow, how did I miss that? But I have
11,
missed things before.
But they raised it from 10 to 11, so that's a 10% increase for their minimum wage workers, and that right there, that's 20% of the population of the United States of America. So I do think these minimum wage increases are having a measurable effect on the nationally recognized increase in wages.
And I think maybe this kind of transitions us nicely to our last story, Ken, and that's the question about the Democratic field. And I know that last week there was a lot of time spent here on the show talking about O'Rourke, but I thought it might be a little bit worthwhile to kind of talk about the Democratic lineup in a bigger way, and in part to kind of pivot to chat about what will be the issues that might gain traction. So if we're going to take maybe the political model over that structural model that we talked about a minute ago, right now we've got about 15 declared candidates. We've got Booker, we've got Gabbard, we got Gillibrand, we've got Harris, Sanders, Warren, Yang. Where do you see the Democratic field shaking up? In some ways, for me, Ken, it feels a little bit like the Republicans in 2016, where you had just a plethora of candidates who thought they had a chance to knock off the Hillary Clinton, the presumed forerunner. What do you think about this from the Democratic side?
Hey, Trey, would you mind, before I answer that question, I want to correct something that I just said, which was partly incorrect about the wages a minute ago.
Sure,
I don't want to leave
sure.
anything partly incorrect. Yeah, so in California, it was a little more complicated than I said. So in April 2016, California did sign a phased $15 an hour minimum wage law into effect. So they have $15 an hour minimum wage, but it goes up by $1 a year until then. So it went up to $11 in 2018. It went up to $12 in 2019. And it keeps going up
$1 a year.
$1 a year until $15. Yeah. So that's the California
so there
minimum
was
wage law.
a 15. So that's why we were both a little confused.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's enacted, but it's not actually going to be affecting any numbers because it's this phased in. Okay.
Yeah, but it is going up by $1 a year, so that is affecting these numbers, I think.
Okay. Well, yeah, we have to take a look at what those percentages are, but yeah, I did not. That we'll have to save for another show, I think. But what do you? So for all of these candidates, though, which one is going to be able to take on to the issue of inequality? I'm just going to kind of say that.
Yep.
Are you a Warren fan? That's kind of where I would feel where you'd land, Ken. But correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, I'm not necessarily supporting Elizabeth Warren for president, although I agree with her ideas a lot, and I like her in the Senate a lot. I feel like her skills in terms of policy skills are really like legislative skills. I actually feel she is where she belongs. And I think, I'm not crazy about the electability metric, but I do feel she'd be less electable than some of the other Democratic candidates. And that also makes me a little bit lukewarm on her being the nominee. I don't actually believe she has a serious chance at being the nominee. But on policy,
so who's your top three? Who's your top three then? Who's your top three?
Who would I be supporting as top three right now? Boy, that's
either
hard.
for you supporting or you think would be the most potentially successful that you could be okay with.
Yeah, well, I feel a little more like it's too early for me to have come up with who I'm actually supporting.
That's fair. That's fair. I was just wondering. Yeah,
but I am willing to do a little handicapping. Although this is this and a dollar will get me a cup of coffee. But I feel like Biden is the front runner now, and I basically think it's his to lose. I think a lot of people just can't really believe that they would actually nominate a 77-year-old, but he is associated with the Obama presidency. He's capable of getting white working class voters who are in many states an important demographic. He's more famous than any other Democrats. I think Biden is the front runner, so I think he's going to be a contender. The other front runners, it seems like Kamala Harris is going to emerge as a front runner. I think she doesn't have as much name recognition as some of the others, but she seems to be very organized and have her profile seems like it's going up. Yeah, and then I think Sanders, I don't think he's really going to get the nomination, but I certainly think he's going to be in the top 2 or 3 vote getters. He comes in probably second most famous to Biden, and he's got enormous numbers of small donors and motivated people who want to work for his campaign.
I had wondered about that. Do you think that Biden actually has a better name recognition? And I don't mean with the individuals who are listening to our show, but in general, than Sanders? I have thought about that. There's been no polling head to head yet, so I don't know. But
Biden, Biden was vice president of the United States for 8 years, and he has a career that's. I guess Sanders has a long career too, but yeah. I think Biden's got an even more. For more of his career, he was high profile for a longer period of time. So. Yeah, I think
the only reason I asked that is I was just last week we were doing stuff at here at OC, and we were looking through some data that suggested that large majorities of people can't name the vice president currently, the past vice president. As a matter of fact, many of them actually get the Chief Justice mixed up.
Yeah.
And so again, that's not really a pushback on you, but it had brought to my mind questions of, for many young Democrats, Sanders is the guy who was running last time. Had a lot of excitement, and while I don't disagree with any of the things that you're saying, it made me kind of question my own perspective on who would be more known.
Well, in actual polls, and it's hard to know what these polls mean because there's so many candidates, but Biden is consistently coming out first in the polls that are being done. So I feel that must reflect more name recognition, and Sanders. He certainly raised his profile a lot, not only by running in 16, but by continuing to. He was out a lot campaigning for congressional candidates in 18, so he was appearing all over the place. I actually went to see Sanders in October of 18 when I was visiting out at the University of Colorado. He came to the campus there. He was campaigning for Joe Neguse, who won that congressional seat, and he had a rally on the University of Colorado campus, and there were thousands of people there, and I'm sure they were there not for Joe Neguse, but for Sanders.
Sanders.
Certainly he's been a big draw among young people. He has a big following. It's a little hard to say. I think Beto O'Rourke actually got more money on his first day than Sanders got on his first day.
He did.
But Sanders, I think, had it from more donors than O'Rourke did. It's just O'Rourke had some larger donors. So but it's interesting that O'Rourke could get more money because I figure O'Rourke is running for vice president, really not for president, and I figure he's got a pretty good chance of being picked as a vice president as a running mate. I don't
know. He has so much baggage. I wouldn't pick him. I'd pick Booker.
Him?
I'd pick Booker.
Yeah. Depends who the nominee is. If it's Biden, I think you'd probably rather pick Booker. And I think Biden's even been talking to Stacey Abrams. On the other hand, if it's Harris, I don't think she could pick Booker. I don't think you'd have two African Americans running together on a ticket. So I think those things are factors. But O'Rourke, if O'Rourke could raise more money in one day than Sanders could, that seems a little bit against the theory that Sanders has the most overwhelming fame or overwhelming name.
Well, I guess for this point, we're going to have to, as you said, right now, I don't want to bet too much money on anything. But I think, listeners, we're going to have to come to an end. Ken, it was wonderful talking with you this week. Listeners, I want to tell you that we appreciate you so much. And I want to let you know that what makes this show possible, what makes Ken and I able to come on here, what makes Jay and Michael be able to come on, is the fact that you guys are so generous to us in your support. And I want to ask that if you have enjoyed this show, if you continue to listen to us, if we're what you listen to on your commute, would you please head to thepoliticsguys.com patreon.com/support, or click on the support link, and you can support us on Patreon. You can support us via PayPal, and those donations are what make this show possible. But additionally, because we recognize, as we were talking about, money is tight. It's not always easy to make these things happen, that we have additional content. So by becoming a subscriber to the show, becoming a supporter, to the show, you will get access to additional material, including what we're going to be recording in just a minute. And that's the bonus show. The bonus shows are offbeat, interesting things that are unique to us. And for this bonus show, I think you're going to be particularly interested, as Ken and I are going to be talking about some of the things that go behind why we read the way we read. And I'd be really interested for you to come listen to that. And for that to be possible, you're going to need to head to politicsguys.com and click on support. Even if you can't, I would ask that you would share us, rate us on iTunes, make us more visible. That's what makes us continue to move forward. And for those of you who already have, thank you so much. The executive producers of The Politics Guys are Michael Baranowski, Jay Carson, Bruce Johnson, Wilmer Morano, Benji Fishman. Today's show was produced by me, Trey Orndorff. We'll be back with a new show on Wednesday. I hope you'll join us then.